I still remember the exact sound the doorbell made that morning. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just that soft, two-tone chime that every suburban house in America has. Ding dong! The kind you hear 100 times a year without thinking twice. But that particular Tuesday morning, at 7:43 a.m., when that sound cut through the kitchen air, I watched the color drain out of my husband's face like someone had pulled a plug. And his mother, Karen, the woman who had spent the last 4 years making my life a slow, grinding nightmare, she set her coffee mug down on the granite counter so carefully, so deliberately, like she was afraid it might shatter if she moved too fast. Like she might shatter. The night before, they had been laughing. Actually laughing, the two of them, sitting at my kitchen table, in the house I helped pay for, clinking their wine glasses together like they'd just won something. "Well, that's that," my husband Derek had said, grinning at his mother with that easy, satisfied smile I used to love. "We've finally gotten rid of her for good. Now we can live in peace." Karen had laughed, that sharp little laugh she had, the one that sounded like a bark dressed up in pearls. "It's about time," she'd said. "It's long past time." They thought I was already gone. They thought I was done. They had no idea what was standing on the other side of that door. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because to understand what happened that Tuesday morning, to understand why it mattered, why it destroyed them, you need to understand what I had before all of this started falling apart. You need to understand what I built, what I gave up, and what I almost let them take from me completely. My name is Ashley. Ashley Marie Calloway. Well, Ashley Marie Henderson now, or it was for 4 years anyway. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the kind of kid who got straight A's, not because school came easy, but because I was terrified of what happened if I fell behind. My mom worked double shifts at a hospital, and my dad had been gone since I was 9, so I learned early that nobody was going to hand me anything. I put myself through Ohio State on a combination of scholarships, Pell Grants, and a part-time job at a campus coffee shop where I smelled like espresso for 3 straight years. I graduated with a degree in business administration and exactly $11,400 in student loan debt, which I paid off by the time I was 28, thank you very much. I moved to Columbus after graduation, got a job in marketing at a mid-size logistics company, and spent 5 years working my way up from coordinator to senior manager. By the time I was 31, I was pulling in $74,000 a year, had $18,000 in my 401k, and had just signed the lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in the Short North neighborhood that I absolutely loved. Exposed brick, big windows, a farmer's market 3 blocks away on Saturdays. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I had earned every square foot of it. That's when I met Derek. It was October, one of those crisp, golden Ohio autumn days where the whole city smells like wood smoke and apple cider, and you feel like anything is possible. My friend Jennifer dragged me to a charity 5K she'd been training for, and I volunteered to hand out water cups at the 2-mile mark. Derek ran past, grabbed a cup, and then, I swear this is true, he ran back. Just turned around mid-race and jogged back to where I was standing. "Did you just run backward in a 5K? I asked him. "Technically, I'm still making forward progress," he said, completely straight-faced. "Just in a different direction." I laughed so hard I spilled water on myself. He handed me his cup to clean up, and then gave me his number written on the paper cup in Sharpie. I kept it for 2 weeks before I called. Derek Henderson was 34, a civil engineer for a firm that designed bridges and highway infrastructure. And he was, I want to be honest here because I think it matters, genuinely wonderful. In the beginning. He was thoughtful and funny and patient. He remembered the things I told him. He showed up. On our 4th date, I mentioned offhand that I'd been stressed about a presentation at work, and he texted me at exactly 8:47 a.m. on the day of it, before I'd even gotten to the conference room, just to say, "You've got this." That was the moment I knew I was in trouble, in the best possible way. We dated for 2 years. He proposed on a Thursday night in our apartment, not some grand gesture with a restaurant and a photographer, just the two of us, take out from our favorite Thai place, and Derek on one knee in the living room with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married the following June. Small ceremony, 53 people, a venue at a restored barn outside of Columbus. Jennifer was my maid of honor. We danced to a song we'd argued about for 3 months and finally agreed on at 11 o'clock the night before the wedding. It was the best day of my life. I want you to hold on to that image for a second. The barn, the dancing, the way Derek looked at me when I walked down that aisle like I was the only person in the world. Hold on to it, because what came next is going to make you sick. Karen Henderson, Derek's mother, did not come to the wedding. She sent a card, with a check for $200 and a note that said, and I quote, "Wishing you both well. Derek, call me when you can." That was it. No explanation, no apology. Derek told me she had a prior commitment and that she'd make it up to us. I was hurt, but I pushed it down because I was a newlywed and I was happy and I didn't want to start our marriage with a fight about his mother. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was agreeing, 14 months after the wedding, to let Karen move in with us. We had bought a house by then, a 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville, a suburb north of Columbus, with a 2-car garage and a backyard big enough for a garden. We'd put $43,000 down, which we'd saved together over 2 years, splitting every contribution exactly 50-50 because that's how we did things. The mortgage was $1,847 a month. We had a guest room, a home office, and a room we called eventually, as in, eventually it would be a nursery. Karen's situation was, I'll admit, genuinely difficult. She'd been living in Scottsdale, Arizona, with her boyfriend of 6 years, a man named Gerald, who I had met exactly once at Christmas. Gerald, it turned out, had been quietly draining their joint account for the better part of a year and had finally left Karen for a woman he'd met at his poker league. Karen was 61, had no savings to speak of, and was facing eviction from the condo they'd shared. Derek called me on a Wednesday afternoon, his voice careful and measured in the way it got when he'd already made a decision and was asking for permission after the fact. "She has nowhere to go, Ash," he said. "She's my mom. I can't leave her like that." "Derek," I said slowly, "how long are we talking about?" 3 months, he said. "Maybe 4, just until she gets back on her feet." I want to be clear. I said yes because I loved my husband, and because I genuinely believed it would be 3 months. 4 at the outside. I am not a cruel person. I understand family obligation. I said yes, and I meant it, and I even drove to IKEA and spent $340 of my own money furnishing the guest room so Karen would feel comfortable. She moved in on a rainy Saturday in March with 3 suitcases, a box of framed photos, and an expression on her face that I can only describe as appraising. She walked through my house the way a buyer walks through an open house, slowly taking note of things, tilting her head at the kitchen layout, running her finger along the windowsill in the living room. "It's cozy," she said finally, setting her purse on my kitchen counter without asking. It was the way she said cozy that I remember. Not warm, not welcoming. Cozy. Like it was a polite word standing in for something smaller and less impressive than she'd expected. Derek didn't notice. He was already carrying her suitcases upstairs, calling back over his shoulder, asking if she wanted coffee. I stood in my own kitchen, watching this woman settle herself into my home, and I felt something shift in my stomach. A small, cold thing. The kind of feeling you dismiss in the moment because you're a reasonable adult and you don't want to be the person who makes everything into a problem. I should have listened to that feeling. 3 months became 6. 6 became 12. And somewhere in that second year, somewhere between the comments about my cooking and the credit card bill I found, and the Sunday afternoon I came home to find Karen sitting in my chair, the one I'd had since before I met Derek, watching TV while my husband sat on the floor at her feet like nothing was wrong at all. That's when I started to understand what I was actually dealing with. But I'm not there yet, because first, before any of that, there was one specific evening, a Tuesday night in November, 3 weeks after Karen moved in, when I walked past the guest room and heard something that stopped me cold in the hallway. I almost kept walking. I almost convinced myself I hadn't heard it right. I wish I had. Because what I heard through that door changed everything, and I didn't even fully understand it until much, much later. The voice I heard through that guest room door was Karen's. Low, deliberate, the kind of voice a person uses when they want to be sure they're understood. "She's not right for you, Derek. She never was. You know that, don't you?" I stood completely still in the hallway. The carpet was thick enough that my socks hadn't made a sound. I wasn't eavesdropping. I'd been on my way to the linen closet to grab an extra blanket because the November cold had finally settled into the house, and the thermostat was doing that thing again where it lied about the temperature. I was 3 feet from the guest room door. I could see the thin line of yellow light under it. Derek's voice, quieter, harder to make out. "Mom, come on." "I'm serious." A pause. The soft creak of the bed frame. She'd sat down. I could picture it exactly. "She's driven. I'll give her that. But driven isn't the same as warm. You need someone who puts you first. Someone who—" "She does put me first." "Does she?" Another pause, longer this time. "When's the last time she cooked you an actual dinner? Not takeout, not something she threw together in 20 minutes. A real meal." Silence. "That's what I thought," Karen said. I stood there in my hallway, in my house, with my hand 3 inches from the linen closet door, and I did not move. My heart was doing something strange and fast. I kept thinking, "Say something, Derek. Tell her she's wrong. Tell her to stop." But the silence stretched out, and the only sound was the furnace clicking on somewhere in the basement, and Derek never said a word. I went back downstairs without the blanket. I sat on the couch in the dark for a long time. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself every mother does this, worries about her son, says too much. I told myself Derek not responding wasn't the same as Derek agreeing. I was very good at telling myself things in those days. The 3-month mark came and went in June. Karen was still in the guest room. She'd started keeping a few things in the hall bathroom: a pill organizer, a jar of cold cream, a blow dryer that she left on the counter instead of putting away. Small, territorial claims, the kind that are individually meaningless but accumulate into something you can't ignore. I brought it up with Derek on a Sunday morning, as carefully as I could. We were sitting at the kitchen table with our coffee, Karen still asleep upstairs, and I'd been rehearsing what to say since about 4 in the morning. "So," I started, "I know it's been a hard stretch for your mom. I really do. But we talked about 3 months, and it's been almost 4. I think we should sit down together, the 3 of us, and put together an actual plan. Timeline, budget, what she needs to do to find a place. Something concrete." Derek looked at me over his mug. "She's still getting settled." "Derek, she's been here 4 months. Her credit took a hit because of Gerald. She's working on it." "I know. I understand that. But there are options. She could look at income-restricted housing, or a roommate situation, or even—" "Ashley." His voice had that flat, tired quality it got sometimes when he didn't want to have a conversation, but also didn't want to admit he didn't want to have it. "She's 61 years old. I'm not going to hand my mother a roommate listing and tell her to figure it out." "That's not what I said." "It's kind of what you said." "It's really not." I put my mug down. "I'm saying we need a plan, not a deadline that I'm going to hold over her head, just a direction, something we're all working toward, because right now it feels like we're just drifting." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can we not do this right now? I have to be at a project site by noon." And that was it. He refilled his coffee, carried it upstairs to get dressed, and the conversation was over. It had lasted maybe 4 minutes. I sat at my kitchen table alone and drank the rest of my coffee while it went cold. What happened over the next several months was not dramatic. That's the thing about this kind of erosion. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a single terrible scene you can point to and say, "That's where it all went wrong." It's 1,000 small things, each one individually survivable, collectively suffocating. Karen started cooking dinner on weeknights. That sounds benign, maybe even helpful. It wasn't. The first time I came home to find her at my stove, spatula in hand, she said, "I hope you don't mind. I knew you'd both be tired." And I didn't mind, not that first night, because I was tired and the food was good, and Derek looked genuinely happy sitting down to a hot meal. But it became a pattern, and the pattern became an expectation, and the expectation shifted something in the house's atmosphere that I couldn't quite name until one evening when I got home at 6:30 after a brutal day. We'd lost a client account. I'd been in back-to-back meetings since 8 that morning, and I walked into my kitchen to find Derek and Karen already seated at the table, food served, and Karen looked up at me with a smile that was almost pitying and said, "Oh, good, you made it. We weren't sure when to expect you." We. She said we. Like she and Derek were the household, and I was a guest who'd shown up for dinner. I looked at my husband. He was already passing Karen the bread. "Long day?" he said, not looking up. "Yeah," I said. "Long day." I sat down at my own table, and I ate my own food, and I thought about the word "we" for the entire meal. The credit card was the thing that finally cracked something open. Not all the way. Not yet. But it was the first time I felt genuinely afraid instead of just frustrated. It was a Thursday in September, 14 months after Karen moved in. I was paying bills online, which I did every month because Derek and I had agreed that I'd manage the household budget. I was better with numbers. He acknowledged that freely. I pulled up our joint Visa statement, and there was a charge I didn't recognize. $1,240 to a place called Sutton and Associates, LLC. I stared at it for a solid 30 seconds. Then I Googled it. Sutton and Associates, LLC, was a real estate consulting firm based in Scottsdale, Arizona. My stomach dropped about 6 inches. I called Derek at work. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he wasn't in a meeting, which meant he had no excuse not to answer my question directly. "What is Sutton and Associates?" I asked, keeping my voice very level. A beat of silence. Just one, but I felt it like a physical thing. "It's a firm that helps people navigate the housing market. Renting, buying, that kind of thing." "In Scottsdale?" "Yes." "Derek, why is there a $1,240 charge to a real estate consulting firm in Scottsdale on our joint credit card?" Another pause. "My mom needed some help looking at her options out there, in case she decided to go back." "In case she—" I stopped, pressed my hand flat on the desk in front of me. "You paid $1,200 from our joint account to help your mother look at housing options that she may or may not pursue." "It was a consultation fee. It's not a big deal, Ash." "It's $1,200 that you didn't mention to me." "I was going to tell you." "When?" Silence. "Derek, when?" "I didn't want to make it into a whole thing," he said, and his voice had shifted, not defensive exactly, but careful, the way a person sounds when they've prepared for a conversation and are now executing a strategy. "You get stressed when we talk about my mom. I was trying to spare you the—" "Don't," I said quietly. "Do not tell me you hid a financial decision from me to spare my feelings. That's not what that was." He didn't answer, and in that silence, in that specific, shaped silence, I understood something for the first time. Derek had known exactly what he was doing when you made that charge. He'd waited, decided I'd object, and done it anyway. And then he'd waited to see if I'd notice. I noticed, but what I didn't know yet, what I had absolutely no idea about as I sat at that desk staring at the Visa statement, was that Sutton and Associates was only the beginning. That there were other charges I hadn't found yet. That the real estate conversation was not about getting Karen back to Scottsdale. It was about something else entirely. Something that had been in motion for months while I was coming home tired from work and sitting down to dinners I hadn't cooked at a table that was slowly, quietly, becoming someone else's. I just didn't know it yet, and Derek and Karen were counting on that. The thing about Sutton and Associates that I couldn't let go of wasn't the money. Well, it wasn't just the money. It was the shape of the lie, the deliberate, architectural quality of it. Derek hadn't forgotten to mention the charge. He hadn't made an impulsive decision and felt embarrassed afterward. He had made a calculation. He had decided that I didn't need to know, that my opinion didn't factor into the equation, that the joint credit card, the one with both our names on it, the one I managed because I was better with numbers, was a resource he could access without me. I sat with that for 3 weeks. I paid the bill because that's what I did. I managed the budget, I paid the bills, I kept things running. I didn't bring it up again because every time I tried to start a conversation about Karen or money or the future, Derek had a way of making me feel like I was the one creating the problem by noticing it. And some part of me, the part that had grown up watching my mom work double shifts and come home too tired to fight, had learned very early that sometimes you just absorb the thing and keep going. But I started keeping records. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would have alarmed anyone who saw it. Just a notes app on my phone, password protected, which I'd never bothered to do before, where I started logging things. The credit card charge, the date I'd asked Derek about a timeline for Karen and he'd changed the subject. The specific things Karen said at the dinner table, the ones that seemed like casual conversation but landed differently when you wrote them down and looked at them side by side. October 14th. Karen told Derek his firm undervalues him and he should have negotiated harder at his last review. He nodded. I mentioned that he'd gotten a 4% raise, which was above market. Karen looked at me like I'd said something tacky. October 22nd. Karen reorganized the pantry while I was at work. My system, by category, by frequency of use, replaced by hers, which I cannot decode. When I asked why, she said she was just trying to help. November 3rd. Came home to find Karen on the phone in the living room, laughing. She saw me and lowered her voice. Moved to the guest room. I heard her say, before the door closed, "She doesn't understand how these things work, Gerald." Gerald, the man who had supposedly broken her heart and left her destitute. She was on the phone with Gerald, laughing, dropping her voice when I walked in. I stood in my foyer in my work coat and I thought, there are things happening in this house that I don't have the full picture of. And then I went upstairs and added it to the notes app. The full picture came apart for me on a Saturday in January, 16 months after Karen moved in. And it didn't come apart slowly, the way everything else had. It came apart all at once, like a seam that's been under tension for a long time and then just splits. Derek had told me he was going into the office. He worked Saturdays sometimes, project deadlines, site reviews. I never questioned it because there was genuinely always something going on at the firm. Karen had said she was going to a lunch thing with a woman from the church she'd started attending, which was news to me since I hadn't known she was attending any church, but I'd stopped cataloging my surprises out loud. I had the house to myself for the first time in what felt like months. I made coffee, I put on the TV, I sat in my chair, and I tried to just breathe for a minute. And then, because I was me, because I couldn't turn my brain off, I opened my laptop to do some work. I was logged into our joint email account, the one we'd set up for household stuff, HOA correspondence, warranty registrations, that kind of thing. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a confirmation email about the furnace filter delivery. What I found instead was a thread with the subject line, Property Assessment, Westerville Colonial. The sender was someone named Marcus Webb at a company called Webb Residential Group. The thread was 4 emails long. The oldest was from 3 months ago. I read it twice before I understood what I was looking at. Then I read it a third time, very carefully, 1 sentence at a time. Marcus Webb was a realtor. He had assessed our house, the 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville, the one with the 2-car garage and the backyard, and the room we used to call, eventually, and he had given Derek a current market valuation of $487,000. Our purchase price had been $341,000. We owed approximately $298,000 on the mortgage. The math was simple. If we sold, there would be roughly $189,000 in equity. The most recent email in the thread was from Derek, sent 11 days ago, At 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when I had been in a staff meeting, it said, "Thanks, Marcus. Let's move forward with the listing conversation. I'd like to keep this quiet for now while I sort out some personal matters on my end. We'll be in touch by end of month. Keep this quiet." Those 3 words sat on my screen like something physical, like something I could put my hand on. I want to describe exactly what I felt in that moment because I think it's important, because it wasn't what you might expect. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the hot, immediate surge of anger that comes with a sharp betrayal. What I felt was cold. A spreading, clarifying cold, the kind you feel when something you already suspected is confirmed, and your body has been bracing for it for so long that the impact is almost a relief. I felt my hands stop shaking. I felt my heartbeat slow down. I felt, very distinctly, like I had been standing in a room with the lights at 30% for a long time, and someone had just turned them all the way up. So this is what's been happening. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. I thought about the Sutton and Associates charge. I thought about Karen's phone call with Gerald, the man she was supposedly never speaking to again. I thought about the way Derek had handled the conversation about a timeline for his mother, the way he'd made me feel unreasonable for wanting one. I thought about all the evenings I'd come home tired to a table already set, a meal already made, my husband already settled into a version of domestic life that had slowly, steadily, been reorganized around someone else. I thought about the room we used to call eventually. And I understood, in the way you understand things when you finally stop being afraid to see them clearly, that this had never been about 3 months. It had never been about Karen getting back on her feet. This had been a plan. Not a plan that had been laid out in a single meeting, maybe, but a plan that had been taking shape, piece by piece, in guest rooms and phone calls and a realtor's email thread, while I kept the budget and paid the bills and told myself I was being unreasonable. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for my coffee to go completely cold, long enough for the winter light to shift in the windows, moving from the kitchen counter to the floor in that slow afternoon way. What I did next was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. I got up, poured my cold coffee down the sink, rinsed the mug, and set it in the drying rack. Then I went upstairs, got my winter coat, and drove to Jennifer's house. Jennifer Marsh had been my best friend since sophomore year of college. She lived 20 minutes away in Upper Arlington, in a small ranch house she'd bought herself 3 years ago, and she was the one person in my life who had never once made me feel like I was overreacting. She was also the one person who had, very quietly, on more than one occasion, asked me if everything was really okay at home, and accepted my deflections without pushing, because she knew me well enough to know that when I was ready to talk, I would. She opened the door before I knocked. She must have seen my car in the driveway. She looked at my face and said, "Come in, I'll make tea." I sat at her kitchen table, a small, round table that wobbled slightly on one leg, which she'd fixed with a folded piece of cardboard and never gotten around to actually repairing. And I told her everything. Not just the email. Everything. The hallway conversation I'd heard 3 weeks after Karen moved in. The credit card charge. The notes app. The pantry. Gerald. All of it. In order, the way I'd never said it out loud before, because saying it out loud made it real in a way that the notes app somehow didn't. Jennifer didn't interrupt. She made the tea, and she set a mug in front of me, and she sat across from me with her own mug, and she let me talk until I ran out of words. Which took a while. When I finally stopped, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ashley, do you have your name on the deed?" "Yes," I said. "We're both on the deed. We put equal amounts down. We're both on the mortgage." "Okay." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Do you have a separate bank account? Separate from the joint one?" "I have my 401k and my work account, where my direct deposit goes. We transfer a set amount to the joint account each month for household expenses, but the rest stays in my personal account." "Good," she nodded slowly. "Ashley, I need you to listen to me very carefully because I'm not going to sugarcoat this." She looked at me steadily across the wobbling table. What you just described is not a marriage having a rough patch. What you just described is a man who has been planning something without you, with his mother's help, for at least the better part of a year. That email is not a misunderstanding. Keep this quiet is not a man who forgot to mention something to his wife. I knew that. I had known it sitting at my kitchen table with my cold coffee. But hearing Jennifer say it, her voice calm and clear, no hedging, no softening, did something to the knot that had been living in my chest for 16 months. It didn't undo the knot. It just finally gave it a name. "I don't know what to do," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I expected, which embarrassed me, which told me something about how long I'd been holding myself together by not admitting that I didn't know. Jennifer set her mug down. "First thing," she said, "is you talk to a lawyer. Not to file for anything yet, not necessarily, just to understand what your rights are, what you're entitled to, what the house situation actually looks like legally if Derek tries to sell it without your consent." She paused. "Do you know anyone? Or do you want me to ask around?" I thought about it. "My coworker Brandon, his sister went through a divorce last year. He mentioned her attorney a couple of times, said she was sharp." "Call Brandon Monday morning," Jennifer said. "First thing." I nodded. And then, because I had been holding it together for so long, and Jennifer's kitchen was small and warm, and the tea was still steaming, and she was looking at me like I was worth looking at, I put my face in my hands and I cried. Not the quiet, controlled kind I'd been doing in the shower for the past several months. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and has been waiting for permission. Jennifer didn't say anything. She just put her hand on my arm and left it there. After a few minutes, I lifted my head, wiped my face with the back of my hand, took a breath that still shook a little at the edges. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said back. I drove home that evening with Jennifer's voice in my head and a specific, quiet clarity that I hadn't felt in over a year. Derek was already home when I got there. He and Karen were in the kitchen, something on the stove, the easy, domestic scene that had become their rhythm and my intrusion. Derek looked up when I came in and said, "Hey, where'd you go?" "Jennifer's," I said. "Lost track of time." He nodded and turned back to whatever he was saying to his mother. Neither of them asked any follow-up questions. Why would they? I was the variable they'd already accounted for, the detail they were managing around. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of our bed, and opened the Notes app on my phone. I added one line to the bottom of everything I'd already written. January 18th. Saw the email. Marcus Webb, Webb Residential Group. Listing conversation. Keep this quiet. Calling Brandon Monday. Then I put the phone face down on the nightstand and listened to the sound of my husband laughing in my kitchen below me. And I thought, they think they know how this ends. They had absolutely no idea. Monday morning came the way important mornings always do, quietly, without ceremony, like it had no idea what it was carrying. I was up at 5:30, not because I'd set an alarm, but because I hadn't really slept. I'd lain in bed next to Derek, listening to him breathe, thinking about Marcus Webb and email threads, and the word quiet, and somewhere around 3 a.m., I'd stopped pretending I was going to drift off and just stared at the ceiling and made a list in my head instead. At 6, I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table alone before anyone else was awake. I watched the January light come up, gray and thin through the window over the backyard with the garden I'd planted, the raised beds I'd built myself with lumber from Home Depot, and a YouTube tutorial, the beds that were dormant now under a skin of frost. I thought about the spring, whether I'd be here to plant them again. Then I picked up my phone and texted Brandon. "Hey, would you happen to still have the name of your sister's divorce attorney? No big drama, just want to have a conversation. Understanding options." He responded at 6:47, which meant he was also an early riser, or the message had woken him up and he'd been kind enough not to mention it. "Linda Cho, Cho Family Law, downtown Columbus. She's excellent. I'll text you her number. Ashley, you okay?" "Getting there," I wrote back. "Thank you." I called Linda Cho's office when they opened at 9. Her assistant, a man named Paul who sounded like he'd heard every possible version of the conversation I was about to have, was professional and unhurried. He got me an appointment for Thursday afternoon. 2 days away. I wrote it in my personal calendar, not the shared one Derek could see. Linda Cho was 43, small, with reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain around her neck, and a direct, unhurried manner that reminded me of Jennifer in the best possible way. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building on High Street, and the window behind her desk looked out over the Columbus skyline in a way that felt, I thought, deliberately positioned. Like she wanted you to remember that the world was still large and full of options, even when you were sitting across from a divorce attorney for the first time in your life. She let me talk for 20 minutes without interrupting. I had brought my notes, not just the app on my phone, but a printed summary I'd made the night before, dates and amounts and quotes, organized chronologically. I slid it across her desk when I was done talking. She read it. Not skimmed, actually read it, her eyes moving line by line, occasionally pushing her glasses up her nose. When she finished, she looked up at me. "The email about the listing," she said. "You still have access to that?" "Yes, it's in the joint household email account. I screenshotted it and sent it to my personal account." She nodded slowly. "Good. That's good thinking." She folded her hands on the desk. "Ashley, I want to be clear with you about a few things. First, your husband cannot sell that house without your signature. You're both on the deed, both on the mortgage. Any legitimate realtor and any title company will require both parties to sign at closing. If he attempts to move forward with a listing without disclosing it to you, he's going to run into a wall. The question isn't whether he can do it. The question is what he's planning to do about you in the meantime." I thought about that. He said he needed to sort out some personal matters before moving forward. Right. She said it the way someone says right when they already know what comes next, which could mean he's planning to present you with divorce papers before he lists, or it could mean he's hoping to get you to leave voluntarily to make the house situation simpler. Has he done anything that might be pushing you toward leaving? I thought about 16 months of dinners I didn't cook, conversations that went nowhere, a credit card charge I wasn't supposed to notice, a pantry reorganized without my permission. I thought about the word cozy. I thought about Derek sitting on the floor at his mother's feet while I stood in my own living room. "I think," I said carefully, "that has been the project for a while now." Linda looked at me for a moment over her glasses. "Okay, here's what I want you to do. Don't change anything in your behavior at home. Don't confront Derek about the email yet. Don't move money, don't change accounts, don't do anything that signals you know what's happening. What I do want you to do is this." She pulled a notepad across the desk and began writing. "I'm going to refer you to a forensic accountant. His name is Raymond Stills. I want him to do a full review of your joint finances, credit cards, bank accounts, any accounts Derek may have in his name alone. If there have been financial moves being made without your knowledge, Raymond will find them. And I want everything documented before we sit down and figure out our next step." She tore the page off the notepad and slid it across to me. I picked it up. Raymond Stills, CPA, CFE. A phone number and an address in Worthington. "How long does that take?" I asked. 2 to 3 weeks for a preliminary picture, longer for a full audit if we need it." She paused. "I also want to say something that's not strictly legal advice, but it matters." She looked at me steadily. "You've been managing the household budget. You know these accounts. You have access. Document everything you can access right now, statements, balances, account numbers, before anything changes. Not to move it, just to know it exists." I nodded. "I can do that tonight." "Good." She stood, extended her hand. "I'll have Paul send you the retainer agreement this afternoon. My rate is $320 an hour. Do you have questions about that?" "No," I said. "That's fine." It was more than fine. It was the best $320 an hour I would ever spend. The next 5 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I sat at the dinner table while Karen served food and Derek poured wine, and the two of them talked about things I'd stopped being included in. Karen's church, a friend of Derek's from the firm who was apparently building a vacation house up near Lake Erie, a TV show they'd been watching together in the evenings after I went to bed. I participated just enough to seem present. I asked questions. I laughed at the right moments. I was, in those 5 weeks, a very good actress. Meanwhile, Raymond Stills was doing his work. What he found, when he called me into his Worthington office on a Thursday afternoon in late February, was not what I had expected. I had expected to find the Sutton and Associates charge, maybe a few other things I'd missed. I had not expected to find a separate savings account in Derek's name alone, opened 8 months ago, at a different bank from our joint accounts, with $23,400 in it. I had not expected to find that Derek had been making transfers of $600 to $800 a month from our joint checking into that account, categorized in our budget software as home maintenance and miscellaneous. I had not expected to find that Karen, over the course of the previous 14 months, had been quietly paying $0 toward any household expense. Not groceries, not utilities, not the HOA fee, not a single dime, while Derek had been covering her share from the joint account without telling me. I sat across from Raymond Stills in his beige office in Worthington, and I looked at the printouts he'd laid in front of me, and I felt the last piece of the picture lock into place. This wasn't a husband who drifted. This wasn't a man who loved his mother too much and didn't know how to balance that with his marriage. This was a man who had made a deliberate, sustained, months-long financial decision to bleed our joint resources while building a private reserve, presumably in preparation for a life that didn't include me. And his mother, Karen, who had arrived with 3 suitcases and an appraising expression and the word cozy, had been the beneficiary and, I was now certain, the architect. I thanked Raymond, took the printouts, drove to Linda Cho's office, and handed them to Paul at the front desk in a sealed envelope. Then I went home and made dinner. Chicken piccata, which I'd never made before but had looked up that afternoon because I needed something to do with my hands. Karen walked into the kitchen while I was cooking and stopped in the doorway with a look of mild, poorly concealed surprise. "Oh," she said, "you're cooking." "I am," I said pleasantly. "Hope you like lemon." Derek came home 40 minutes later to a table I had set, a meal I had made, and a wife who smiled at him and asked about his day. He was visibly, almost comically off balance. He'd gotten used to a particular dynamic, and I had quietly rearranged it, and he didn't know what to do with that. Karen watched me across the dinner table that night with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not contempt, not dismissiveness, something more cautious than that. Something that looked, if I'm being honest, a little like calculation. Good, I thought. Start calculating. The doorbell rang at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning in March. Derek and Karen were at the kitchen table. I know this because I had already been up for an hour. I'd slept badly again, or pretended to, and I was standing at the kitchen counter with my coffee when the chime came through the house. That soft, two-tone sound. Ding-dong. I watched Derek's face go still. I watched Karen set her mug down on the granite counter with that careful, deliberate movement, like she was afraid of breaking something. I set my own mug down. "I'll get it," I said. I walked to the front door and opened it. Standing on my porch were 2 people. The first was Linda Cho, in a charcoal blazer and the reading glasses on their beaded chain. The second was a man I didn't know, 50s, gray at the temples, carrying a leather briefcase and a manila envelope. Behind them, at the curb, I could see Jennifer's car parked behind Linda's. "Good morning, Ashley," Linda said. "Good morning," I said. I stepped back and held the door open. "Please come in." They came in. I led them to the kitchen. Derek had stood up from his chair. I don't think he'd meant to. I think his body had done it before his brain caught up. Karen had not stood up. She was still at the table, both hands around her mug, and she was looking at Linda Cho with an expression that was trying very hard to be composed. "Derek," I said, "this is my attorney Linda Cho, and this is—" I looked at the man with the briefcase. "Thomas Garrett," he said. Process server. Mr. Henderson? He looked at Derek. Yes, Derek said. His voice had gone flat. Thomas Garrett opened the manila envelope and placed a document on the kitchen table in front of my husband. You've been served, he said. Divorce petition, filed in Franklin County. Have a good morning. He left. Linda stayed. Derek looked at the document. He looked at me, and I watched something move across his face. Not the easy, satisfied smile I used to love. Something older and more uncertain than that. Ashley. Don't, I said. Not loud, not angry, just clear. Don't start with Ashley in that voice. We're past that. Karen made a sound, something between a word and a laugh, that sharp bark dressed up in pearls. You're making a mistake, she said. You have no idea what you're doing. I looked at her. For the first time in 4 years, I looked at Karen Henderson without any of the accommodating softness I'd been wearing like a second skin. I just looked at her, the way you look at something you finally decided not to be afraid of. Karen, I said, I know about the $23,400. I know about the transfers categorized as home maintenance. I know about Sutton and Associates in Scottsdale, and I know about the calls with Gerald. And I know that in 16 months of living in my house, you contributed exactly $0 to any household expense while my husband funneled money out of our joint account to cover you. I paused. I also know about the Marcus Webb email. Keep it quiet. Those were Derek's exact words. So I kept it quiet. For 5 weeks, while my attorney and a forensic accountant documented everything. I picked up my coffee mug. You're welcome to stay for breakfast, but I'd rather you didn't. The kitchen was absolutely silent. The furnace clicked on somewhere in the basement, the same sound it had made that night 16 months ago when I'd stood in the hallway and heard the beginning of all of this. Derek was still looking at the petition on the table. Karen had gone the color of old chalk. Linda Cho, to her credit, said nothing. She just stood near the doorway with the reading glasses on her chain and the expression of someone who had been in many kitchens like this one and knew that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the silence do its work. The divorce took 7 months. Franklin County, no minor children, contested on Derek's side for the first 3 months, and then not, once his own attorney apparently explained to him what the forensic accounting looked like in front of a judge. We sold the house. Both of us signed, because there was no other legal option, for $491,000. After paying off the mortgage, the equity was split according to our documented contributions. I received $97,400. Derek received slightly less after the court took into account the undisclosed transfers and the joint funds spent on Karen's living expenses without my consent. Karen moved out the week after I served Derek. She went back to Scottsdale. I don't know if she went back to Gerald or found somewhere else. I found I didn't need to know. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the short north. Not the same one I'd had before I met Derek, but the same neighborhood. Exposed brick, big windows. A farmer's market 3 blocks away on Saturdays. Jennifer helped me move in on a Saturday in October, and we assembled furniture from IKEA and ordered pizza and sat on my new floor eating it, and she said, "You know what you never did once, this whole time?" "What?" I said. "You never stopped being yourself," she said. "They were counting on you to disappear. You didn't." I thought about that for a long time after she went home. About what it means to disappear, not all at once, not dramatically, but one small accommodation at a time. A pantry reorganized. A dinner table that becomes someone else's. A word like cozy that stands in for something smaller and less impressive. The way a person can be present in a house and still be slowly erased from it if they let it happen. I didn't let it happen. Not completely. Not enough. My 401k is at $31,000 now. I got a promotion in November. Director of Marketing. $94,000 a year. The raised garden beds from the Westerville house are gone, but I have 2 planters on my apartment balcony where I grew tomatoes last summer that were, objectively, excellent. I still have the Notes app. I don't add to it anymore. But I haven't deleted it either, because sometimes I open it and read from the beginning. October 14th, October 22nd, November 3rd. And I remember the specific quality of that period, the way I move through my own life like I was apologizing for taking up space. And I use it the way you use a scar. Not to mourn the wound, but to remember that you healed. The doorbell doesn't make me flinch anymore. That soft two-tone chime, ding-dong, it's just a sound again. Ordinary, unremarkable, the kind you hear 100 times a year without thinking twice. But I think about that Tuesday morning sometimes. 7:43 a.m., Derek's face going still. Karen's mug set down so carefully on my granite counter, in my kitchen, in the house I had helped build and refused to disappear from. They thought they knew how it ended. They had planned for a version of me that no longer existed, the one who absorbed things and kept going, who dismissed the cold feeling in her stomach, who sat alone at a kitchen table while her coffee went cold and told herself she was probably overreacting. That version of me had been gone for a long time. They just hadn't noticed. That's the thing about people who underestimate you. They're so busy building a story where you lose that they never stop to consider you might be building one too. Mine just happened to be true.